Afternoon, Cherries fans, and welcome to this latest special interview here on Up the Cherries in All Departments. Before I welcome on my special guest, here is a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. To find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Now, my special guest today is one of the leading finance experts in football. He's written a book called The Price of Football. He's an academic, author, and a broadcaster. He does a regular podcast with Kevin Day. It is a pleasure to welcome on to the show KIERAN Maguire. Afternoon, KIERAN. How are you?
I'm very good. It's a non-stop summer in the world of football finance, so don't get a break. I'm sure people will realise that there's a lot happening in terms of financial fair play changes. Derby County is an ongoing saga, which I'm hoping will be put to bed by the end of this week. But all is good. Thank you very much.
Excellent stuff. And one of the teams that I did want to discuss was Derby, but of course, AFC Bournemouth, a club traditionally we have had issues financially, and that is where I wanted to start off. So, of course, we had the issues back in 2008 which ended in our great escape. We did start the season on minus 17 points. Fantastic documentary about that. But we also had the Winter Garden situation well before that as well. But of course, things have picked up since being promoted to the Premier League the first time round. Of course, second spell now we're going into in the Premier League. But the big question is how much of a disparity is there between the Championship and the Premier League, and how do we even bridge that gap?
I think as far as the Premier League is concerned, there's actually more than one Premier League. There's an elite, and there's a middle class, and then there's the rest of us. And that's not being disrespectful to clubs. I'm a Brighton fan. I put Brighton in with the rest of us group, similar to Bournemouth. For a club that does not have parachute payments, so if we take a look at Nottingham Forest being promoted, for example, Forest's broadcast revenues in the Championship were around about £7.5 to £8 million a season. That will go up to a minimum, I would say, of 98 in the Premier League, and that's if they finish bottom. For every position you finish up the Premier League, it's around about an extra 2.4 million. So getting a top half finish is very lucrative, especially for the smaller clubs. On top of that, when you talk to the commercial team at a club, a front of shirt deal in the Championship, we're talking hundreds of thousands. If you get 500-600k, then that's actually quite a good deal. When you go into the Premier League, I think realistically you should be looking at a minimum of 5 million. You can get more than that. I think clubs such as West Ham, Everton, Villa, Leeds, which have quite big fan bases, are able to extract more than that. And then the final source of income is match day. Now, when Bournemouth were last in the Premier League, and we had full crowds able to attend in the pre-COVID era, Bournemouth made less than 4p in the pound from ticket sales. That was, I think, reflective of the capacity of the ground, and that really can only be addressed by expansion, unless the club goes down the route of raising ticket prices, which I don't think would go down particularly well with fans.
One big thing that you did bring up there, and it's been something that has been raging on social media, is the change of sponsorship here at Dean Court. So last season we were sponsored by MSP Capital, had a very, very good long relationship with the club. However, this season the club have decided to go down the route and appoint Daffabelt as the sponsors, and of course, that's gone down badly with some of the fan base here, that they feel that we shouldn't be going down the route of bringing in a betting sponsor. But it's unavoidable, I guess.
Well, if you talk to Crystal Palace, they've just switched from a gambling sponsor to Cinch. Aston Villa switched from a gambling sponsor from Cinch. Then we've got Everton, who have gone from Cinch not just to a gambling sponsor, but to a crypto casino, which there's gambling and there's gambling. And so it's a very sensitive topic. Clubs will say it's legal. If you take a look at football when it's broadcast on television, first of all, you've got the gambling industry. I wouldn't say it's exclusively in terms of the adverts pre and post matches, but it's you get pretty much hammered. The gambling industry will point out that they do have what they call a whistle to whistle ban, which sounds almost responsible, but is in fact just a ban at half-time adverts, if you think about what whistle to whistle actually means. And then you tend to find that the show is sponsored by a gambling company, so there's no formal adverts, but the gambling industry does get exposure. And of course, during the matches, there will be perimeter advertising, which will be regularly featuring gambling companies. So trying to get a proportionate, a measured response to this, because it is emotional. And, I've got to be completely transparent here. I've spoken to all party parliamentary groups in respect to the finances, the gambling industry and its connections to football. I've spoken to parliamentary private secretaries. I've attended the House of Commons with families of people who have lost their loved ones to suicide following gambling debts, and it's an issue which I don't think is being dealt with particularly well. When you've just got an extra £100 million coming in from promotion to the Premier League, and then the clubs are saying, well, on top of that, it's the extra £1.5 million that we'll get from a gambling company compared to a company in another industry, and we can all look at other industries. You can say, well, what about airlines? Because from an environmental stance, what about the finance industry? Which historically, you look at the words finance and scandal, Google that, and you'll find plenty of it. We would go back to 2007, 2008, and the global economic crash, which was caused by the finance industry. So there is no such thing as a pure sponsor in the vast majority of circumstances. But gambling is one which is a sensitive one. I think kids like to wear the same shirts as their heroes on the pitch, as the same shirts as their family might be wearing as adults, and you're not allowed to do that if it's a gambling sponsor or an alcohol sponsor, for example. So I think you take a club like Everton, I think 2 years out of the last 20, their younger fans have been able to wear shirts with the sponsor's name on. So it's a delicate subject. I think when clubs say we have no alternative, I find that personally disingenuous, that they do have an alternative, and the alternative saying no and making a stance. But then it comes down to the viewpoints of the club owner, the chief executive, the board of directors, and so on, as to where their priorities lie.
And of course, with Dean Court being so small, as you say, it is 11,000 seater stadium, give or take a couple of seats as well. But there is issues, of course, that we can't expand the stadium because it isn't owned by the football club at the moment. The danger there, though, I guess, is should we be relegated, we spend over our means, and we can't sell those players like we did when we come out of the Premier League the last time around. We sold those players for a profit. So the likes of Nathan Ake, Callum Wilson, Arnaut Danjuma. We sold those players at a profit, bought them in cheaper, and that actually sustains us in the Championship. But if we can't do that next time round, isn't that a big danger?
It's a risk, and the nature of business is that it's full of risk. So if we take a look at the season 2020-21, Bournemouth had total revenue of just under £77 million. On top of that, they had player sale profits of 56, and that did allow the club to make a profit in that first year in the Championship, and to cushion the blow of relegation. I think you're right to highlight that infrastructure spending doesn't necessarily guarantee a return on investment, and part of the problem that we have in the world of football is that if we take a look at Bournemouth, getting £5 million a year from match day revenues, where you've got clubs such as Manchester United on 110. I think Spurs could easily get to 120 this year. Liverpool 80. There's even with a bigger Dean Court, you're not going to come anywhere near those clubs. But I think as far as what you might consider to be Bournemouth's peer group are concerned, the clubs like Palace, Brighton, Fulham, and so on, Bournemouth are still significantly behind those clubs as well, and it does make things more difficult. So do you take a gamble, invest in a greater capacity stadium, in the hope that you survive a couple of seasons and then you become more sustainable compared to that peer group? Or do you take a more cautious view and say, we're going to stay where we are with the capacity of the stadium as it is, because the fear is if we go for a 25, 30,000 seater stadium and get relegated, you end up with a half full stadium, and that's not good from an atmosphere point of view. And you've still got ongoing structural costs and maintenance costs in respect of that stadium. So like all business decisions, it's there's never a completely transparent and completely right answer. You've got to back your judgment, but having the capacity of the stadium where it is automatically puts a ceiling on the club, unless it manages to trade players incredibly successfully on a very regular basis.
One of the good things as well is that we are well run at the moment, and that's the general feel from the fan base in Neil Blake and Jeff Mostyn. One thing though that was effectively postponed for a little while was the training ground. So it was due to be built when we were in the Premier League the last time round. Of course, COVID happened, which was completely unexpected, and really hit the club, put that on hold, and that work has now started. And I think that's where the philosophy comes from, of growing these players, bringing them through and selling them on for a bit of a profit. But there has to be that danger that if those players can't make that step up, we are going to be at an instant disadvantage if we can't spend. At the moment, we've made two signings, which is Ryan Fredericks and Joe Ruffwell, and they're both on free transfers. Good pieces of business, I should say. But is it becoming even tougher for those promoted sides to actually keep themselves in the Premier League, considering the amounts of money that are being floated around?
Yes, and I think what we're seeing from more and more clubs is that they realise that by investing in better training facilities, that reduces the number of soft muscle injuries that you have during a season, which means that you can deliver results. If you've got 4 or 5 players out on a regular basis due to injuries, and for a club that's just been promoted, 1 or 2 of those players could be your new signings. 1 or 2 of those players could be your high-profile players. It does make it very difficult. So clubs are responding by investing in improved medical facilities, in improved sports science, in terms of assisting the club, and also because of the abolition of the old 2-hour rule in terms of training. You now have a danger. What happens if Chelsea set up training facilities not too far away from Bournemouth, and kids start going there instead of going to what Bournemouth have to offer, because the facilities offered by other clubs are more attractive. So there's a bit of an arms race. Every player that comes through the youth ranks is realistically it's a 15 to 20 million pound saving in respect of somebody you've not had to recruit from either the Championship or another Premier League club in a similar position, or perhaps a European club. So there are financial benefits in investing in these facilities, which we do see, and we are seeing a huge amount of investment by Premier League clubs. And talking to people in the industry, they say we've really woken up to just how important this is, because I was talking to somebody at one of the larger Premier League clubs. He says the difference between finishing 4th and 5th is goal difference, or 1 point a lot of the time. And if we've got a couple of fewer injuries or during the season, then that can make all the difference. Or if we can get players back in 4 weeks instead of 6, because we're using the sports science, or if we're identifying those players that are suffering in terms of their metrics. People like Training Ground Guru are really amazing in terms of what they're churning out for clubs. Then I think the clubs realise that these marginal gains, following investment in sports science, in academy, in training ground facilities, genuinely make a return on investment. So again, challenging decision, because what happens if Bournemouth go down after a season? Then it makes life harder when you get to the Championship.
One of the things, though, a lot of people have noticed in the Championship, and it's true again last season, Fulham were relegated from the Premier League, got instant promotion. I know Norwich have been promoted on a number of occasions and been relegated on a number of occasions after 1 season in a lot of cases. With that, is it becoming tougher for the teams, say, for example, let's take Millwall and Bristol City, teams that haven't got to the Premier League yet? Is it getting tougher for them to actually make that step up and get ahead of these parachute payment teams?
It is challenging, that there is no doubt. The purpose of parachute payments when they were originally created was to acknowledge that the Premier League had been, I'm not saying too successful, but had been successful beyond the expectations of anybody, including the Premier League itself, in terms of generating money. And that meant that when Premier League clubs were relegated, even though clubs have relegation clauses, because I've got the numbers for every club relegated over the last decade, and on average, wages are going down around about 35%. So there is significant reductions. If we abolished parachute payments, then you'd have to persuade players when they join the club to take 80% pay cuts, and they'll say, "Oh, thanks very much, but no thanks." Why? Could you persuade a half decent player playing in Portugal or Belgium or the Netherlands to come to your club in January on a decent player? So you're signing again that 15 to 20 million pound bracket, which clubs like Bournemouth, clubs like my team Brighton, that's where we are shopping. you'll be paying them, realistically, you'll be paying them somewhere in the region of 45 to 50k a week, but 80% of that could go on the 30th of June because we have to have compulsory 80% pay cuts if the club's relegated. And presently, you're 17th, 18th, 19th. I've spoken to chief executives and they say this is the problem that the people who say let's just abolish parachute payments don't understand. In respect of the clubs that you've mentioned, Fulham have benefited from parachute payments. So I'm not denying that. Fulham have also benefited from having an owner, Shahid Khan, that has put £500 million into the club. They were in a position to offer Mitrovic the most lucrative contract in the history of the Championship last August, which has put him on more than probably half the teams in the Premier League itself, due to Shahid Khan effectively saying, I don't care what it costs to get back up to this division, don't care what the losses are. And that was a big factor. If we take a look at Bournemouth's player trading, again, you had an owner that was willing at the end of January to say, we're in a goodish position. Let's now go out and utilize the markets, and I'll effectively back the manager. And it's not the parachute payments themselves. We've just seen Forest promoted, so they weren't in receipt of parachute payments. Bournemouth weren't promoted when they originally went up. Was it 2014?
2014-15.
2014. Yeah. They did that on merit rather than the use of parachute payments. Brentford have just gone up for the first time. We've had Huddersfield and Brighton. We've had 50 teams in the Premier League in its first, in its first 29 seasons. So parachute payments add a layer of complexity and distortion. But the purpose of parachute payments was to try to address the gap between the Premier League and the Championship. If we address that gap on a more global scale, if we have more even distribution of money throughout all of the 92 clubs, then there is no need for parachute payments, and they automatically disappear. But I think if you just abolish parachute payments and say they're the problem, then you say, well, hold on, we've got parachute payments between the Championship and League One. Why is nobody talking about them? Because, again, we've got yo-yo clubs, the likes of Rotherham, Barnsley, who are doing exactly the same as what we're seeing between the Premier League and the Championship. We've also got parachute payments between League Two and the National League, and nobody's talking about those. So I think a comprehensive review of financial distribution would benefit the game, but nobody wants to do that review because it's in the Premier League's interests to do nothing. It means that the EFL can't do anything because they're a separate organisation to the Premier League, and therefore, I don't know what your views are in respect of the recommendations of the fan-led review, but this would be one of the areas which I think would be addressed, because having somebody with an oversight in respect of financial affairs will mean that ideally what's beneficial for the game as a whole can be addressed, rather than what's beneficial for small groups of clubs, both between divisions and also within divisions.
Well, I'm all for the fan-led review because I feel that we do need to make the game a lot fairer. There is teams at the very top who are running away, and effectively the Super League situation that we had a couple of years back, which would have been terrible for English football. It would have been terrible for Spanish and Italian football as well. And the thing is a lot of that is born out of the debts that both Real Madrid and Barcelona have got themselves into. Would you agree on that?
They were certainly drivers of Super League, as were certain Premier League clubs. You often say in business, crisis creates opportunity. And I think that the clubs used COVID as a smokescreen to justify the existence of the Super League project, the franchise project that had been created. And there is a belief, especially at Real Madrid, who without Super League have just won the Champions League, the European Cup, for the 14th time in their history. And they say, well, we are that they like to portray themselves as victims in respect of the financial affairs of football, and yet the clubs that they constantly poke a stick at, which is Manchester City and PSG. But when I last checked, neither of those clubs had ever won the Champions League, and Real Madrid is saying, well, we've won it 14 times, and we're the innocent party in all of this. So Spanish football in particular is, I think, envious of the resources of the Premier League, and by having a Super League, it would deal with those, because Barcelona and Real Madrid both have magnificent stadiums. They do better than English clubs to a certain extent in terms of match day revenue. What they can't match is the TV deals.
One of the teams as well that I wanted to bring up is Burnley. So they've recently been relegated to the Championship. I guess at one point they expected it. Going into that last game of the season, they probably thought that they were going to be okay. They had a lot of players out of contract, and I thought that they were really going to struggle, because looking at their finances, there was quite a big debt that they would have to pay off. However, they bought in Scott Twine straight away from MK Dons for £4 million. Of course, Vincent Kompany is in charge there. Do you have any idea what is going on there? And are they using the parachute money, or are they gambling?
They're using the parachute money to pay for the club. So what happened was that Burnley originally was owned by some local businessmen. They never put a penny into the club all the time the club was in the Premier League. I've said on many occasions that, along with Spurs, as a business, they were the best run clubs, Burnley and Spurs, in the Premier League. Always used to break even. They had a really tight wage structure. Everybody was within $5,000. If you were a first team player, there was a narrow band. It was around about 40 to 45 grand. No big time Charlies, no superstars. It was a team. It was molded by Sean Dyche in terms of the style of play. You knew when you were playing Burnley, you knew in advance exactly what to expect, and that's not disrespecting Sean Dyche or the players themselves. They had very specific roles. Because the club was actually it was the fourth most profitable club in the history of the Premier League. So we're talking Burnley, which actually had the smallest capacity. Especially after Bournemouth left the Premier League, Burnley had the smallest capacity stadium, and they were only in the Premier League for 8 seasons, but they still managed to be the fourth most profitable club in the history of the Premier League, and this attracted investors to them. Except that the people that acquired Burnley Football Club bought the club via what's referred to as a leverage buyout, which is effectively, if you've got somebody who has a house with no mortgage, you come in, buy that house from them, but you're using an 80 or a 90% mortgage to pay for it. And that's fine, provided you've got the money to pay the mortgage. That wasn't quite the case at Burnley. The new owners used some of the club's own cash to pay the old owners. And on top of that, they borrowed money from a boutique lender called MSD Holdings. And one of the clauses within that was, should Burnley be relegated, MSD Holdings wants a significant proportion of its loan back. Its loan was 65 million. So now, what significant proportion is has not yet been defined. So we do await that. So that's where we are with Burnley, in that, yes, they have had parachute payments, but those parachute payments have been used effectively to pay back a lender. Remember, they've also sold Nick Pope for 13 million. They've got me and Tarkovsky off the wage bill. There will be quite a few other players who are out of contract, as you said yourself, at the end of June, and they'll be looking round. I could easily see some of those players re-signing for Burnley if they don't get substantial offers from elsewhere. But they will have to acclimatise to a Burnley wage offer based on expectations in the Championship rather than a carryover. So I think Burnley will be okay. They won't be able to spend the same amount of money that we saw in respect of the likes of Fulham. But I think financially they will survive, but they will not be in the same financial good health that they were under the old owners, and of course being in the Premier League as well.
We'll bring up Derby County now. So, of course, it has been well documented, Derby struggles. So Mel Morris went for it, tried to get into the Premier League and failed. However, they were then put into administration last season. They've been through a torrid time, eventually getting relegated, being deducted 21 points. Thankfully, it looks like that Clouds Developments have actually purchased the club and have saved the club from liquidation, which would have been a travesty for football because of the size of that club and the historic nature that it's got. The biggest danger surely has to be that these clubs gambling, and how can we stop them from doing that once they've got hold of the reins?
Well, I mean, there has been talk about a tighter owners and directors test, but I'll be honest, I think Mel Morris would have passed every single owners and directors test. For those people unfamiliar, the owners and directors test has two main elements. First of all, do you have any outstanding criminal convictions? And secondly, can you demonstrate that you have the resources to fund the club, normally for a period of at least 2 years? On both of those counts, Mel Morris would be absolutely fine. He's been a very successful businessman. He's a very wealthy businessman. I think he owns some property not too far from Bournemouth, and I think we both know what area of Dorset we're talking about. There's first of all, can we disincentivize people who don't want what's best for the club to apply? I think some work can be done on that. What else can be done? Well, there have been a number of suggestions, and I've got to hold my hand up here. I have presented to DCMS I've presented to the fan-led review with regards to financial issues, and I have had regular communications and meetings with DCMS since the fan-led review. So again, I do believe in being transparent. There have been suggestions along the lines of, should there be perhaps some form of bond that an owner pays into a central fund upon acquisition of the club, and that money is only paid back upon the successful transfer and sale of the club, and that will be similar to what we have in the holiday industry. If you go on holiday and your airline or your travel operator goes bust, we've got things like ABTA and Atoll, which are there to preserve people. So you could have some sort of central funding with regards to that, effectively an insurance policy. So that would discourage some of the more fly-by-night operators. Then we could have financial controls, simple things like real-time monitoring of football clubs' financial affairs. So we get to see just how much money they got in the bank. We have a regulator or somebody who has the ability to see whether or not clubs are paying their tax on a monthly basis, because that's a classic red flag. Derby ended up with non-payment of taxes of around about £28 million. Now that was an issue to a certain extent pre-COVID. But then the club, to a large extent, used COVID as a smokescreen to not pay its bills. And when COVID stopped and the music stopped, Mel Morris says, we've got a big tax bill now. I know what I'm going to do. I'll put the club into administration. So I think there are ways of addressing the extent of the danger, but no one system, unless we nationalise football, and nobody wants that. Even I work in the city of Liverpool, where I think it's fair to say that there are some people with a broad spectrum of political views. Even those on the far left say, no, I don't want to nationalise football. That is the people's game, not the state's game. So I think there are ways and means of making it more difficult for people who acquire football clubs to cause as much damage and havoc. And here, if we look to see what happened at Bury, at Macclesfield, there are ongoing issues at Oldham Athletic. There are issues currently at Rochdale as well. We've just seen Swindon go through a really unpleasant arrangement. Southend have had issues, ups and downs. It happens too often in football. That some form of improved checks and balances could be created. What we have at football at present is the Premier League is owned by 20 shareholders. Those 20 shareholders are the clubs in the Premier League. Are they going to vote for any rules which makes it more difficult for owners to sell clubs, in the sense that there'll be greater scrutiny and more scrutiny over the affairs of the clubs on a regular basis? No, they're not, because it's turkeys voting for Christmas. It's exactly the same in the EFL. There have been suggestions on many occasions that championship clubs should have some form of wage control. And every time the subject is brought up, the club owners say, no, thank you. And that's why, if we take a look at championship wages, that's why in 2021, which I know was a COVID year, wages were 120% of revenue. The previous season, they were 107. The previous season, they were 101. And we go on and on and on. There's no incentive for cost control when the rewards of promotion to the Premier League are so large. So you have to incentivize people to do the right thing. And under the present governance structures of both the EFL and the Premier League, that's not going to happen, because you don't want to vote for anything which is going to make your life more difficult. And if I was a club owner, I'd understand that. And I'm not going to criticise overtly the owners, but they have brought this upon themselves.
And of course, there's so many clubs that have gambled and failed throughout the years. We could take Portsmouth, for example, as a club who were in the Premier League, tried to push on and get themselves further up Premier League and put themselves into real danger. And it's the only points deduction ever in the Premier League to date. With regards to Portsmouth and their situation and how they actually, because the fans bought the club in the end and got them out of administration, how do we stop a club like that, for example, who were not particularly well run when they were in the Premier League, and how important are supporters trusts?
I think it's important to separate, because we talk about clubs, but actually we're talking about club owners. And the two things are separate, because what happened with Portsmouth was that they were in financial constraints. They were financially mismanaged. There's no doubt about that. And then they became a sort of a toxic pass the parcel, where new owners would come in, try to buy the club at a distressed asset price, and then immediately were looking for some other mug to pass it on to, who were then trying to do the same. And that's why the club ended up in the terrible mess that it has been through. And it's been down to League Two. And Portsmouth, we both know how big Portsmouth is as a city, coming from the south coast. So supporters trusts are magnificent in the sense that they are involved with football out of love, rather than a financial return on investment. And that's good. But that automatically creates a ceiling in terms of what can be achieved at that club, because the average losses in the Championship are £400,000 a week. Supporters don't have that money, and here this is where you either get promoted to the Championship, you don't have a particularly competitive budget, and you effectively your ambition is to finish fourth bottom, and that's about as exciting as it gets. And that's the genuine challenge for a supporters trust, in that they'll come in, they'll try to organise. They won't necessarily have experience of running a football club, and initially what you tend to find is it's like any, if you ever run any form of local sports society or any other club, it doesn't even have to be a sports club. Initially, everybody's excited about it. Everybody piles in. And then within 6 months, you're down to a hardcore of people who are dedicated, who do work hard, but then they start to get criticised because, why aren't we signing anybody? I'm bored. I don't want to see us lose every week. We need somebody to come in, and you get the old adages, speculate to accumulate. Well, the people that say speculate to accumulate, I don't see them taking their wage packets at the end of each month and buying scratch cards with a view to trying. This is the way to make a fortune. So there's a lot of financial naivety and financial ignorance coming out in some of the comments that you see. We all want to be entertained as fans. We all want to see our club be successful. And if somebody comes in as an owner and promises you a fantastic time, and if you talk to Derby fans, they'll all say the same thing. When Mel Morris first came in, the wage bill tripled. That wage bill went up by £30 million in the first 3 years. Revenue only went up by 9. So they were living the dream, and if managers didn't work out, the managers got sacked quickly. They had Frank Lampard. They utilised they utilised the loan market well, and they came within a whisker of getting promoted. And if they had been promoted, Mel Morris would be the most popular person in Derby, as opposed to, I suspect, he's the most unpopular person, even though he's still got his cheerleaders. In that city, people say, well, he did try his best, but what happened with him was that as soon as he realised that the game was up in terms of the way that the accounts had been manipulated and massaged, that you can't do that forever, he threw the towel in.
Just staying actually on Derby, there was an attempted purchase of the club, and he did pass the fit and proper persons test, and that was by Chris Kirchner. And of course, it all fell through. It appeared that he didn't have the capital to actually put into the club, or the transfer wasn't done. I can't say exactly what it was. I've read stories and conflicting interests on that front. But how and what sort of criteria do we need to put in place for that fit and proper persons test to actually ensure that the best possible people are taking charge of football clubs which are part of our communities?
It's very difficult. Chris Kirchner was able to show to the EFL, and was also able to show to the administrators, bank account statements that showed that he had X million dollars in a bank account, and those bank accounts were given a certificate of authenticity from some extremely well-known global banking corporations. Mm-hmm. Now, he says, on this particular date, I've got $30 million in a bank account. Mm-hmm. And the EFL say, okay, and here we've got the letter of authenticity, and the administrators said that. So it was genuine. How long that $30 million was in that bank account, whether it was there 3 weeks later, we don't know. The very fact that we're now seeing reported that Chris Kirchner's own company did not pay wages on time last month, that he's putting up some of his personal assets, such as a plane, is now up for sale. He's trying to generate cash. That does show that it's a very precarious activity, getting people who are not connected with the game involved in the game, and I don't think there's any way that you can get around it, because if we take a look at what happened at Wigan, Wigan was sold in was it June 2020 to a guy called Al Young. Now Al Young, by all accounts, passed the fit and proper test, owners and directors test of the EFL. The club wasn't in administration. People just thought, well, it was one Far Eastern organisation selling the club to another individual from Southeast Asia, and then 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later, having acquired the club, he put it into administration. How we don't have time machines. We cannot read people's minds. So there is no system through which we can guarantee the existence, and I don't think there's any way that you can't have a wrong-onometer which will identify that somebody's intentions for the club are not in the best interests of the football club and the fan base and so on. It's all you can try to do is to make it more difficult for those people to get involved in the game in the first place. It's a bit like having a burglar alarm on your house. It doesn't stop people from breaking into your house, but if you've got a burglar alarm and the house next door hasn't, then the chances are they're going to try to burgle that house first. And I think that's what we've got to do with football.
Yeah, most definitely. And if we look at another club, which is a bit of a role reversal of Bournemouth, so we are being run well now. However, if you take Reading, for example, a club that was very, very well ran under Sir John Madejski, and then he decided to sell the club, which is, entirely up to him. Sold it to a gentleman called Zingarevich, who then failed to purchase the remaining 51%. Then it was sold to a Thai consortium, and now it's with a Chinese company. And they had a 6 points deduction last season as well. And if you look at their wage bill as well, it was ridiculous. Surely there has to be these incentives. And what are those incentives got to be for clubs being ran properly?
I think perhaps there could. You're absolutely right. Incentives are good. If we take a look at Reading, Reading last season were paying £243 in wages for every £100 that came through the door. And if you don't have to be at business school to realise that's not a sensible way to run a business at all. No. And yet that overspend had occurred for the last few years. How do we incentivize? Well, you do monitor the finances much closer than has historically been done. You get owners to commit to things such as, if you buy a football club and you sign a player on a contract, then the owner personally guarantees that contract should the club go into administration. So you make it such that if we take a look at Reading's accounts, and I've got them here in front of me, in 2020, the average wage bill for Reading, and I'm not being disrespectful, Reading, 18 grand a week. You're going, hold on, it's Reading. Can you name 3 players who play for Reading? So why are they being paid? Why are they paying 18 grand a week on average? So I think it's the route to go down to make it uncomfortable for club owners, or if they are going to commit, then they also have to pick up the tab if should things go wrong on a personal level. Again, it could be that they've got no assets themselves or they transfer. But again, the whole point here is that you make it more difficult for them or less advantageous for them to get involved in football in the first place. And hopefully they go off and do something else.
How should we distribute the money that comes from the Premier League? Because the Premier League pays a set amount to the EFL each year. Firstly, does that need to be increased? And secondly, how does that need to be distributed? Does it need to be distributed to those clubs that do the right thing? A club like Lincoln, for example, who a very well-run club, Luton, another very well-run club. Should they be getting more of a share than the others, for example?
I think some people have put forward this as a proposal in something that's referred to as the Sustainability Index. There's an organisation called Fair Game which has proposed that. That has some merit. It's increasing the bureaucracy involved in football. I'm a believer in light touch incentives to try to get people to do the right thing. How do we deal with things in the EFL? Well, there's a lot of talk about the greed of the Premier League and not giving enough money to the EFL. As soon as you look at the EFL has got an 80-12-8 split. So the EFL, there's greed at the Championship level, just as that there is, the accusations of greed at the Premier League level. My personal view is we need to address the distribution model overall. In an ideal world, returning to a single football organisation would help, but that ain't going to happen. I'm being naive here. I think that would happen. If we go back to the original broadcast deal, it was 50, 25, 12 and a half, 12 and a half. I was asked by some senior people, shall we say, to devise some spreadsheet models, looking at different distribution models. And I came up with one which is based on how the NFL distributes money, where match day income is split 60-40 between the home club and the rest goes into a pool and is then distributed. You do the same with commercial income. You have the broadcast money is pretty democratic in the sense that the team winning the Premier League will get around about 160 million compared to that finishing bottom is on 100 million, but sort of doing that on a more broader basis throughout the divisions. And it came back and people said, that looks very nice, but nobody's going to vote for this. I said, you asked me to do this, but there's no support, because the problem with distribution of money is that when you talk about distribution of money and you actually start listening to people, what they want is for them to have no less money than before, or more money, and for other people, especially the people they don't like, to have less. And life's not like that. If I talk to Liverpool fans, they say, well, we're not happy with Manchester City having so much more money. So if I say, well, okay, do you want a distribution model along these lines, but that you do realize that you'll end up with less money as well? Go, oh, no, we don't want that. So the size of the cake is not going to get bigger. It's how you slice it. And everybody wants a larger slice of the cake for themselves, no matter what you say. I can go into spreadsheet heaven in terms of, doing more and more suggestions, but you get the same problem. Somebody ends up with less and they're going to kick off about it.
Well, it's been really, really interesting having you on today, Kieran, and finding out your thoughts. And do tell us a little bit more about your book as well, because you've got a book out which is called The Price of Football. So do tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I'm a teacher, and I've always used football. I've taught at university for far too many years to admit. And I've taught, all my teaching life's been in Liverpool and Manchester. So I've used football as sort of as a Trojan horse for teaching traditional finance. And then students were saying, can we have a dedicated football finance module? Convince universities of that. Yes, that seemed to be popular. And there's no textbook for it. So I thought, okay, I'll write a textbook. It took me a couple of years to research all of the numbers and put it together, but it's good fun, and as a teacher you quite so I've got a class of 120 kids at Liverpool, so I thought, well, if I'm lucky, a third of them will buy the book, and I might get another 10 copies stocked in the library, so that's 50 copies. I get £1 a copy as a royalty. So I thought, oh well, I'll give all the royalties. I'll get 50 quid out of this. I'll give all the royalties from the book to a food bank charity, and I've given 50 quid to a local food bank charity because I do, yeah, I'm involved with them sort of at the periphery, and that was fine. And I said to my wife, "Are you okay with that?" Yeah, it's only 50 quid, and then it sold 12,000 copies, but I'd already committed, so I've never earned a penny out of the book. The royalties have gone to either food bank charities or the Ukraine relief appeal. But if anybody's got any interest in football finance, then it's not for me to say whether the book is good or not, but people seem to like it. I try to make it in layman's terms. I do a podcast with a stand-up comedian called Kevin Day, who's also a comedy writer, and we do okay on that. We get pretty good numbers, and we put out live shows as well. So that's sort of my background.
Excellent stuff. Well, all the details about the book, how you can get that, and also the podcast as well, with Kevin Day, will be down below in the description. But thank you so much, Kieran, for sharing your insight with us. It's been really, really interesting, and hopefully, fingers crossed, things will improve across the whole of football, to make it a lot more sustainable and also a lot more managed.
Well, one hopes so, but I suspect within a couple of weeks of that happening, there'll be fans shouting, "Spend more money, spend more money!" And we all love football so much; it gives us incredible shared experiences and memories in life. But as a business, it's just terrible.
No, exactly. And let's be fair, there is a lot of bad owners out there. There's some very, very good owners as well. And thankfully, we have got some very good owners at the helm now in Maxim Denham, Neil Blake and Jeff Mostyn. So long may that continue. But again, Kieran, thank you so much for your time today. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to going to Dean Court later this season.
Excellent. Look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks, okay. Kieran.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, everybody, for joining me on this special show. Please do remember to hit the like, the subscribe, and the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Please do check out our recent video with Algard where we discuss signings. We've already got 2 correct. We've also got special shows with Gareth Withers where we talk about, is the Premier League competitive? We've also had a show about Eddie Howe as well with John Sinclair, and loads of interviews with the likes of Steve Cook, Harry Redknapp, Steve Fletcher, and many, many more. So please do check them out and do hit that subscribe button. We do have a very special show that is coming up fairly soon. So please do make sure you keep your eyes peeled and hit that bell, because then you'll be alerted to it. But until the next show, up the cherries, and I'll see you then.